Welcome to another episode of the brand called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I am your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a good friend, a globally recognized coach from London, Mr. Kerry Sulkowicz. Kerry, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Ashutosh. It's always great to see you.
Thank you. Kerry is the founder and managing principal of the Boswell Group, which is a management consultancy based in New York since 1998. He's the founder and CEO of Know Thyself 360, and he's the past president of the American Psychoanalytic Association. So, Kerry, we're going to be speaking about Know Thyself 360 today, but a few introductory questions for you, for my audience. You know, you have had a remarkable journey from psychiatry to boardrooms. What inspired your transition from clinical practice to advising CEOs?
Well, thanks, Ashutosh. I wish I could tell you that I had a brilliant grand plan to get me from point A to point B, but that would not be true. It was really a series of fortuitous accidents along the way. I trained as a psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, as you know, and a professor of psychiatry at NYU School of Medicine in New York. And I thought I was going to spend my career in clinical practice, seeing patients and teaching. But after about 5 years, I realized that I wasn't entirely happy. Uh,
Hmm.
some parts of my clinical work I loved. I loved helping people, and I'm still passionate about that. And I like the intellectual underpinnings of my work. But I was a little bit too restless to sit in an office all day and see one patient after another. And I realized that my temperament was more suited to being more out in the world and learning and interacting with people outside of my office.
Hmm.
And I also had a bit of an entrepreneurial streak. I'd started one business that, the truth be told, was a complete failure, but a fantastic learning
Yeah,
experience.
yeah.
Um, Starting my consultancy a few years later, fortunately worked out better, but it really began at a cocktail party when I was asked for advice from
Hmm.
a first-time CEO. And one thing led to another, and I wound up finding a way to apply my understanding of human behavior to working with leaders, and it really
Hmm.
brought together some passions of mine.
Amazing, amazing. And you worked across multiple countries with thousands of leaders, global leaders. What are some consistent patterns you notice across people and environments when you coach them and support them?
Well, their cultural differences are, of course, extremely important, and those differences exist from country to country. Sometimes they exist from company to company within the same locale. But I think some of the consistent issues that come up, and I suspect this has been true since the dawn of time, since there were leaders in society,
Yeah.
is the fundamental fact that leadership is a lonely and isolating kind of experience. You're
Correct.
surrounded by people. That's the paradox. You're surrounded by people, but there are often very few people, if anyone, that you can talk to about the most sensitive, confidential matters inside the organization. And leadership also is such that even with the most benevolent, kind leader, there is something profoundly inhibiting about power dynamics on the upward flow of information. And in some ways, that has been what has enabled me to do my job over the last nearly 30 years. And in many ways, it gives rise to Know Thyself 360.
Hmm. And that's a great segue to Know Thyself 360. Tell me about Know Thyself 360. What led to the creation, and what problem are you aiming to solve?
Well, over the last nearly 30 years of serving as an advisor to CEOs and boards and management teams around the world, I have had the privilege of getting to know a lot of interesting people. And in the context of that work, I have often been asked to get feedback on the individuals that I'm working with, that I'm coaching. A board will ask me to get feedback on a CEO, or a CEO will ask me to get feedback on him or herself or on members of their leadership team. And for all this time, to this day, I have done it in what I would describe as the old-fashioned way,
Hmm.
which is simply to have the individual choose a relatively small, manageable group of stakeholders. There's no magic number, but let's say 8 to 12, and then I interview them. I sit with pen and paper. I still use a fountain pen, so it
Yeah.
shows how old-fashioned I am in some
Mm,
regards.
mm, mm,
Um, and I ask them about what the individual does well and where is the room for improvement. And then I be quiet and listen. And I have found that people will naturally tell me what is really most important.
mm.
And so I've done hundreds of these over the years, the old-fashioned way. I've
Yeah.
taken notes, I've thought about it and written a composite report, and then presented my feedback
Mm.
back to the individual who's seeking the feedback, and then we work on it together.
Correct.
So I've done that for a long time, and I found it to be a rich and powerful process because it yields such nuanced information about
Mm,
the leadership behavior of the individual, and particularly if I can create a feeling of a safe atmosphere in which I assure the people that I'm interviewing that I will keep their remarks confidential, and then I will put together a composite picture, excuse me, of the leader. It works really well.
mm,
Now, starting about a year and a half ago, Ashtosh, I was walking on the beach, and I was, like many in the world, I've been trying to teach myself about artificial intelligence, reading all I could get my hands on about AI.
mm,
And I first started to wonder whether or not AI could somehow assist me in the process of putting together these feedback reports.
mm.
But the idea then went through a couple of more iterations. And maybe I should just get a hobby and start collecting stamps or something like that. But that's not that interesting to me. And instead,
Yes.
I hired a software engineer and a product designer, and we put our heads together. And I asked them if we could work together to design a piece of software that, to some degree, simulated the very human process
Mm,
of, of seeking 360 feedback,
mm,
synthesizing it as well as anonymizing the feedback, and then producing a brief report. Uh,
mm.
and that was really the birth of Know Thyself 360. In fact, the name um, came to me that when I had the very first thought of this product.
Mm,
I shamelessly stole the name from Socrates because I
mhm.
figured he'd been dead long enough, and he and many other
Yeah.
philosophers have written
Mm,
about the value of knowing oneself.
mm. Amazing. So tell me a little bit more about how you are managing to use artificial intelligence with psychoanalytic principles in Know Thyself 360.
Yeah, well, it's been a really fascinating learning experience creating this tool, and I have a great team working with me. I certainly couldn't have done it without them. Um, I know I've learned a lot about AI over the last year since I've been working on this, but before I knew, very little. It really does marry AI and a psychoanalytic perspective in a few ways. One is that the AI, the LLM, the large language model that we're using, has been in effect trained by reading some redacted 360 reports that I've written over the years to learn my style of writing, which is
Mm,
and of preparing these reports, which is to keep it really simple. Many of the 360, there are a lot of 360 tools that are out there online and otherwise.
mm,
And I've always found them disappointing. And a lot of the CEOs that I work with, when they get a request to provide 360 feedback, they're usually filled with dread
mm.
because they take so much time to fill out. And B, they're filled with a lot of pseudoscience and other useless data that tries to quantify aspects of human behavior that don't lend themselves to being quantified. It's purely qualitative, subjective information that is really the most valuable.
Right.
And so we only ask two questions, and this is really more the psychoanalytic part of it, which is we ask two questions. What does the individual do well, and
Mm,
where's the room for improvement? And then
mm,
we create a safe, open-ended space for people to answer. And in a sense, that psychoanalytic aspect of this is that we trust the conscious and unconscious motivations of the people providing the feedback to gravitate to what's most salient about the individual. So
right.
we don't need to ask 50 questions like
Yeah.
some of the
Mm,
instruments. It'd be
mm,
like my saying, giving you feedback and saying, listen, my friend Ashtosh, you're a 9 out of 10 in terms of your ability to communicate a vision. And that is a useless piece of information. It just tells you that you're better than some guy with an 8.
Yeah,
But what really matters is to qualitatively describe how you communicate your
yeah,
vision.
yeah, yeah. And then you are able to use AI tools, I would imagine, to be able to collate these qualitative responses that you're getting into something more meaningful.
Exactly. The AI does two things. One is it collates, it synthesizes the feedback into a very brief, readable 1 to 2 page narrative report. There are no bars, no charts, no graphs. It's just a section on what you do well and where the room for improvement. But the
Mm,
other thing that the AI does an amazing job of, and we tested this for months before releasing it back in February, which is that in addition to synthesizing and collating the feedback, as you say, it also does a great job of anonymizing the feedback. In other words, it disguises the identity of the individual comments so that people can feel more comfortable, more safe, providing the most candid, forthright feedback. There's no attribution, in other words,
mm.
thanks to the AI.
Fascinating. And Kerry, many feedback platforms focus on competencies, and you would give me one example. How does Know Thyself 360 approach the why behind behavior?
Well, that's a great question. First of all, when we ask these open-ended questions about what does the individual do well and how can they improve, um, as I said, people will gravitate to what is most important. If it's about competencies, then people will talk about competencies.
Yeah.
Somebody needs to be better skilled in terms of their financial acumen. But usually at the top of organizations,
Mm,
it's less a matter of competencies and it's more about leadership behavior.
mm,
And that's what Know Thyself 360, I think, is particularly
mm,
good at at assessing.
mm,
Um, Once the feedback is synthesized and anonymized and the individual gets their 1 to 2 page narrative report back,
mm.
that's the end of our process because I really believe that while AI is fantastic and can do so many things well
Yeah,
and so fast, there's still room for humans.
correct.
And so when somebody gets their feedback, whether it's about competencies or other aspects of their performance and behavior, um, there's a whole art really to what to do with that.
Mm,
And I don't think talking to an AI bot is the answer.
correct.
I think people should they first of all they should sleep on it. They should
Mm,
resist the temptation
mm,
to be defensive about it, even though it can be difficult sometimes to hear this feedback.
yeah.
They should talk to a trusted other, your spouse, your coach, your therapist, your boss, somebody you trust, who
Mm,
you believe has your best interests at heart, who can help you
mm,
not only process the feedback, especially the critical part, but
correct.
to figure out what to do with it.
Great response. And from a psychoanalytic lens, why is feedback often resisted by leaders, even when it is constructive?
Well, that's been something that we have paid a lot of attention to in the creation of this tool, and we even have a small section at the beginning of the experience of Know Thyself 360 that asks individuals why do they want feedback, and
Mm,
also what concerns, if any, do they have about receiving it, and we have a bit of a multiple choice menu of some of the
mm,
common concerns that come up. Some people, by the way, I would add, aren't don't seem concerned at all about it and
mm,
actually, can't wait to get feedback and in fact see feedback as a gift, which is really how I see it. I mean, what could be more empowering, it seems to me, than having some appreciation for how you're perceived or experienced by important people in your world.
mm,
It seems to me that's such an empowering thing to know rather than to be in denial of. But
mm,
nonetheless, to answer your question more directly, there are a number of reasons why people may be reluctant to get feedback. One is a concern that it will be a little bit painful to see, and sometimes people would rather be in denial than
yeah.
to really find out what people
Mm,
think of it.
mm,
Sometimes people are concerned about getting feedback because they're concerned about who else might hear about it. Will it be shared somehow? And we are real sticklers for confidentiality here, and we have gone to great lengths to preserve the confidentiality of the feedback. Another reason why people may sometimes be reluctant to get feedback is they have a question about, well, even if I get this feedback, and even if I'm asking for it,
Mm,
um, what if I can't act on it? What if it's like telling me that I'll be more effective if I'm a foot taller, which of course
right.
is, in other words, is the feedback going to be realistically actionable?
Mm,
Is it something that I can change?
mm,
And that is something that we try to pay attention to in providing feedback. It needs to be feedback that is realistically addressable by the individual.
mm,
My own last thing I'd say, by the way, is that all feedback, if we're really honest, all feedback we get, even for those who see feedback as a gift,
yeah.
is going to sting a little bit when you get it sometimes, the
Correct.
constructive criticism. And in fact, if it doesn't sting, it's probably not very helpful feedback.
Mm, mm, mm. Very well said. My next question is that can you explain to us how confidential behavioral feedback is ensured while preserving honesty and psychological safety?
Sure. We ask an open-ended question. The access to the feedback is the AI, of course, has access to the individual comments, and then it does its work, so to speak, by synthesizing it. And it synthesizes it in a way, and we've tested it quite a lot to make sure that this really works.
Mm,
It synthesizes it in such a way that it stays true to the essence of the feedback but remove some of the nuances of an individual's speaking style, for instance, so that it's not attributable or identifiable. The other thing that we've learned is that in our testing, we that if fewer than six people give feedback, it's harder for the AI to anonymize it, and so we do ask that. And we require that individuals choose between 6 to 20 people to provide feedback because the greater number makes it easier, of course, to anonymize the feedback.
correct. Well said. The other thing that I was fascinated was when I was reading about Know Thyself 360 was that you were able to help uncover blind spots that even seasoned leaders often miss. How does this happen?
Well, look, I think self-awareness is at the core of what we're doing, hence the name Know Thyself.
Yeah.
Um, and from my experience, the best leaders have more than a modicum of self-awareness. Now, I should also point out that nobody ever reaches the promised land,
Mm,
as it were, of complete self-awareness. It's something to strive for over the course of one's life, but you never fully get there.
mm,
And so, as a psychoanalyst, I go under the assumption that there are always parts of our mind and parts of our behavior that we are unaware of. Some of that isn't problematic at all, but some may be, and that's where blind spots come into play. There are aspects of how our behavior makes other people feel. It's usually in that realm um, that there's an issue, and I think it behooves leaders to have some insight into that. If maybe I can give you a quick example
yes, please.
to illustrate the point. One CEO who I work with, who's
Mm,
extremely effective and successful, and is a very has a really penetrating kind of intelligence and probing curiosity, loves to ask
mm,
questions.
mm,
All of that is wonderful and contributes to his success
mm,
because he's so intellectually curious. Um, Sometimes when he is deploying that curiosity and his inquisitiveness towards members of his team,
mm,
and this came up in 360 feedback, using Know Thyself 360.
mm,
Uh, Sometimes those questions, the way people experience those
mm,
questions is not so much these are benign questions to help me sharpen my thinking. It felt more like an inquisition or an interrogation,
mm,
and it made members of his team much more anxious than they needed to be, so that they would be wary and resistant to having meetings with him rather than
mm,
welcoming it as an opportunity to think, together.
amazing.
So I think that it was really it was not the feedback was not that he should stop asking those questions, but he should be mindful of a blind spot about the tone of the questions and the rapid fire nature of them, which had the unintended effect of making people want to pull away from him rather than to join him in these conversations.
Amazing. And Are there any ethical considerations that we must keep in mind as we increasingly rely on AI in leadership diagnostics?
Well, certainly confidentiality, which you've asked about and we've touched on, I think
Yeah.
is really important. Um, I'm a big fan of the virtues of AI, but I think there are also potential excesses. It's one of the reasons why I think AI is great at helping synthesize and anonymize this feedback in what is otherwise a very human process. But I think the coaching that follows is best dealt with in the context of a live human relationship. I should also point out that one of the other ideas that I had in developing Know Thyself 360
Hmm.
is why should AI enabled feedback or even just feedback in general
Mhm.
be the exclusive province of senior business leaders,
Yeah,
executives in big companies?
correct.
It's an established practice, and so it's a well-trodden path in the
Mm,
business world to get
mm,
360 feedback. But it seems to me that another, I suppose, ethical aspect of this is can we democratize feedback?
mm,
Because it is so powerful and helpful to people to have this kind of insight into how others experience them. So why not feedback for everyone? And
mm,
so Know Thyself 360 was designed not only for its enterprise applications,
mm,
but for personal applications, people who are interested in enhancing their self-awareness, people who
mm.
are talking to a coach or a therapist, people who just want to understand more about themselves.
Sure, sure. Well said. So I have time for two more questions for you. How have companies responded after implementing Know Thyself 360? What kind of behavioral changes have you observed?
So far, the response has been really good.
Mm,
We are trying it in a number of companies since launching only 2 months ago. The uptake has been good. As I mentioned earlier, I think one of the main responses is that people are so drawn to its safety,
mm,
the assurance of the anonymization. They're drawn to its affordability. Right now, the price is $60 per feedback report. A lot of companies are uh, committed to these subscription-based HR suites of software that often will have a 360 in it. But a lot of those 360s are those kinds of cumbersome ones that take a lot of
correct.
time and generate 50-page reports. So people are relieved.
Mm,
Uh, and it's just so user friendly. It only
mm,
asks these two open-ended questions, and you can either speak the responses into your iPhone. It's optimized for the
mm,
phone,
mm.
or type them with a 1,000 word limit. So the test can be the instrument can be completed in less than 10 minutes, usually,
Wow,
sometimes 5 minutes. So
wow.
it makes the whole process much less onerous and frankly a lot of fun.
Mm. And I guess from a coach's perspective, saves a lot of time as well.
It saves a lot of time for the coach. Coaches have been and we've been working with some influencers. I'm learning about influencers, and
Mm.
a lot of them are coaches who have found Know Thyself 360 very helpful to
Yeah.
augment their work.
Amazing, amazing. And my last question for you, Kerry, if you had to summarize Know Thyself 360 in one sentence that captures its soul, what would it be?
I don't know if this captures its soul, Ashtosh, but I'll give it a try. Okay, I would say that Know Thyself 360 is a safe, affordable, and user-friendly feedback tool that enhances self-awareness by giving people that you invite an opportunity to share the most important observations
Hmm,
about what you do well and where there's room for improvement.
what a great response. And on that note, Kerry, I just want to say thank you so much for speaking to me. It's always a pleasure to talk to you every time I meet you. Today's conversation was quite an eye opener for me because I have used 360 myself as a coach, but now I'm going to reach out to you and see if we can start using Know Thyself 360 in the few coaching assignments that I still do. Thank you so much for speaking to me and good luck to you.
Thanks so much for having me on the show again.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast.
platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.